The next section of the body paragraph comes immediately after the topic sentence, and this is where we provide evidence to support that topic sentence. And evidence comes in basically two things, right? One is explanation and one is examples and proof, right? So for explanation, you know, like it says here on your screen, some people may think that their topic sentence just makes it so obvious why somebody should believe what they're saying. But we don't write essays that are that easy. We're writing to people who either don't get it or who've never considered different aspects or who've never even heard of these things, right? And so we have to explain what we mean by our topic sentence. We have to lay out our reasoning. So this is where that critical thinking and logic comes through. Now let me tell you why, you know, crossfire is something that should make us not want guns on campus. Let me tell you why the guns on campus proposal can be a way to deal with the budget problems that have, you know, decimated campus security offices, right? Now I need to tell you why. And so again, there can be a lot of different things that you do in there. Again, the master guide to essay and rhetoric goes through some of those things. Just know that this is where you lay out your argument. And then you back that up with examples and proof. So it's not just for me to tell you, okay, now prove it, right? So sometimes we prove it by just giving people a common sense example. In papers that are not requiring research, a lot of times we can just use typical examples of things that we know happen that people who are paying attention or who look into it will find those things, right? Or we can actually use real examples that are so well known that we don't technically need to document the use, right? For example, you know, any of the recent school shootings, you know, anybody that's watched TV or read a newspaper is aware of those, but even if they weren't, if we invoke Parkland High or something, people can Google that and find it real easily. So this is an example of common sense, common knowledge kind of things, right, that we can use as examples. There are three kinds of examples that we can use: typical, specific, and hypothetical. You can see here on this fourth bullet point, and there's an example of each kind in parentheses to show you the different ways they work, right? And sometimes just an example isn't enough. We need to provide objective evidence that is research, right? Or is common knowledge that people can use to see that it's not just our opinion, that there's actually real data out there, real facts, real examples that prove what we're saying. So for an example, I consider the perfect mix, and again, a good way to show you how to develop a paragraph is that you combine both a typical and a specific, right? So the typical explains what usually happens, and the specific gives us a real case from research that proves, right? So you can see here in the example, this might be something I would say that would go in this would be an example of how you would use something in an introduction, I think. You may start off your introduction by students face many attempts to convince them that guns on campus will provide a safer environment. And just think about how we've identified our audience and we provided context, right? Then we say part of this comes in the form of statements by elected officials. So now I'm going to give a typical example of what kind of statements we make, right? So in Oklahoma, many state legislators have proposed bills every year for the last decade that would legalize concealed carry on college campuses by licensed gun owners. That's a typical example. It doesn't give you specific names, specific dates, or anything like that. It just tells you what generally has happened. But we're going to add a specific example as proof of what we've just said, right? And so that's in italics. The most recent is SB 1159, submitted by Senator Scott and Representative Enns in February 2018. Now, when do you need to use both? Again, I think it just helps develop the paragraph. Especially if you're talking about something that has happened repeatedly, over and over again in different places, you give the typical to show just how it is, and then you give a specific to prove that, no, I'm not making this up. If you don't need specific proof, then you can just get by with a typical example, perhaps. Again, it depends on how much you really need that specific to help prove your point or move forward your argument. The last part of the body paragraph, or the A part, is analysis, right? So again, we've given them the point of support in the topic sentence. We've explained what we mean by that. We've given them now evidence to help clarify and make anything that might be abstract in our explanation really concrete. That's not always enough, right? People can be given facts and figures and still not see, well, then why does that still prove what you think, right? So in the analysis section, what we're doing is we are connecting the dots. We are showing how our topic sentence, explanation, and examples all work together to not only prove that point, but also support in part our thesis statement, right? So how long this needs to be is really determined by the controversialness of your topic. You may have some audiences that are much harder to convince than others. Sometimes in explaining and providing evidence, we work in a bit of connection, so we don't have to do as much with the analysis. Again, it's really a case-by-case basis. You need to look and say, have I really then put all of this together so that the reader knows how it all supports? And the T of the meat is not the last part of your paragraph. Transitions are things that we use throughout our paragraphs to connect our ideas and our phrases and provide coherence to our reader, right? And so again, you can look on the master guide for some more details and some links to places that provide you a whole bunch of different kinds of transitions and how they work. The thing is that transitions function in a couple of ways to make a great essay. On a very grammar mechanical, if you will, level, transitions create smooth flow from one idea to the other. So your writing isn't choppy, Sometimes I get paragraphs that are really more like bulleted lists. Like if you look right here, right, there is no necessary flow to this. There's just bullets. If I wanted to make this into a paragraph, I would have to figure out how can I connect all of these ideas and use those words and phrases to move from one section to the other, right? So sometimes transitions cause a problem because they just kind of mess up the flow of your writing and it's real choppy. On a more serious level, though, they can actually, the lack of them can create problems with coherence. That you can have several sentences together and I'm not sure how they all connect. Is this an either or? Is it a plus? Is it, a 1, 2, 3, right? So again, transitions provide clarity and coherence as well as flow to our writing. And so they're very important. Third section of our essay is the conclusion. So notice now we have that equilateral triangle flipped on its broad base. So the beginning of a conclusion is a paraphrase of the thesis. And again, if you don't know what a paraphrase is, look at your Master Guide to MLA. There's a whole section, right? So what I want to do is I don't want to just repeat exactly how I expressed my thesis in the introduction because my reader is at a different place. When they first get my thesis, they are going into my argument. They don't know what I've argued. They don't know the evidence that I've provided, right? And so I'm going to give them my thesis in a way that reflects their different stage in this journey. In the conclusion, they're coming out of my 3 points of argument and all the evidence. So I want to give that thesis in a way that then is starting to wrap up what I've just said. So it needs to differ just to reflect the different place that my reader is in. The next section of the conclusion, that middle section, is kind of like the background and context of the introduction. Really difficult to give you very specifics about what you need to do there because it really depends on who you're arguing to, what your topic is, the stance you're taking, those kind of things. But in general, this middle part briefly summarizes and reflects on what you've just told them in the body, right? But it doesn't do so by re-arguing each of those points. Instead, it looks at them all together. And that's the big difference, So when I say summary, I don't want you just to repeat your topic sentences. You're not looking at it in that kind of discrete 1, 2, 3. Instead, you're going to summarize overall what what your points were, what you were arguing, what your main purpose was, and then reflect on what you said. And again, we're not using first person here, so you can look at the examples that I give you in the master guide, and then when I give you an essay assignment, I will give you an example of the conclusion as well, to just kind of see how you can handle that. You know, that's why we turn in drafts and I give you feedback, so that I can look at what you're doing and help you understand what you need to do to best suit your purposes. The very last part of your conclusion is the so what factor. This is where you are wrapping up the whole paper and where you are appealing to your reader very specifically, and you're answering this hypothetical question that they may be thinking of. Okay, so I've heard your argument, I've heard your evidence, so what? Why should I care? So this is where you make that last push to show them the consequences that could be negative or positive if they act or if they don't act. You may also ask them to make a specific action. You can say, call your attorney, stop doing this, recycle now, or, it just really depends on what your purpose is, who your audience is, and what your argument is. But that's how we wrap up our essay. Okay, for the rhetorical triangle, I am going to have a second video that covers this, because this is specifically something that we use over and over again in Comp 2. So I want to make that separate so you can just watch that if you need it.